Hi, Justyna and Kuba. We are a couple from Poland who travels around Europe in search of traces of our prehistory and inspiring places. And everything we find, we share with you in our videos. This time we are taking you to the interesting island of Crete. This one who has been to Crete has probably at least heard of the Palace of Knossos. The video about Knossos is already on our channel, so we won't repeat ourselves. As an interesting fact, I will only mention that there is no information about King Minos from the times when the Palace of Knossos was full of life and full of people. However, a clay plaque which was found in this place mentions the mysteries of the labyrinth. So maybe we should talk about some version of Ariadne without King Minos? While you are in Knossos, you can look at Mount Juktas through the so-called Horns of Consecration. Some say that Mount Juktas resembles the profile of Zeus, and that his grave is there. At least that's what I heard in Crete. The ruins of a Minoan sanctuary are on the top of this interesting mountain. And on the way to the peak of Juktas, next to the old Minoan road, there are the remains of the impressive Anemospilia temple. They are impressive because in Minoan times, a human sacrifice was made there. If you want to see our unusual point of view on Knossos, please watch the video linked in the description below. Meanwhile, we are taking you to the parking space at Anemospilia. As everywhere in mountainous Crete, the view is picturesque. Anemospilia. Let's go. Temple of Anemospilia. It seems that this temple was built about 2000 years BC, and it is located by the former Minoan road to the peak sanctuary at the top of Mount Juktas. Anemospilia is famous for the possible human sacrifice that took place here. There was a terrible moment then, about the time of the eruption of Thera, that is the year 1650 BC, because this year is pointed at the collapse of the temple. Perhaps there were preliminary seismic shocks, perhaps after the eruption of Thera, the earthquakes continued. So people in this disastrous situation decided to make a human sacrifice. This place is no exceptional. In extremely dreadful situations, people did such sacrifices everywhere until the spread of Christianity. Everything seems to show that the human sacrifice took place in the temple next to me. During almost certainly an earthquake, the entire sanctuary collapsed, leaving the scene as it was over 3,500 years ago. Let's go and see. Corridor. The famous three entrances. 2-3 rooms. Let's start with this room. The room with human sacrifice will be at the end. Here, as was indicated by artifacts, bloodless sacrifices took place. Fruit, cereals, vegetables. There were found bowls with some particles of food, like in other places with bloodless sacrifices. A room in the middle. Here were pitosis and larger vessels. Clay feet from some kind of statue were also found here. The feet are larger than human feet, and they stood on a bench at the back next to the wall opposite the entrance. There was a lot of charcoal near the feet, probably a remnant of the wooden rest of the statue of the deity. there is no data to define what kind of deity it was. Next room was connected with a human sacrifice. Here, somewhere in this place, was a table. An 18-year-old young man laid on it, in a pose as if he was tied up. On a young man, a dagger or a spear end with the head of a boar. In this place lay the priest in a boxer's position. The priest, considering the local conditions, was simply a giant, because he was 1.78 meters tall. The priest was 38 years old. The young man on the sacrificial table had a height more typical for this region, that is 1.65 meters. The priest wore an iron-silver ring on his finger. The ring was so melted in the fire, which destroyed the temple, that it is impossible to recognize what is on it. Considering that the whole scene took place in the Bronze Age, the iron was probably meteoric, and if it's so, this ring must have been very valuable and probably rich in symbolism due to its origin. The priest was also wearing a bracelet, an agate seal that depicted a boatman in a boat. Notice that the rower is carved in the dark part of the agate, which cuts into the light part in a narrow band. The boat, on the other hand, apart from the fragment under the rower, is located in the bright part. I don't think this is a coincidence. And behind the offering table, here, lay 28-year-old woman, face down with legs apart and outstretched arms. The woman, a priestess, was 1.54 meters tall. It seems to be quite typical for women in Crete at that time. This additionally shows how tall the priest in the room was for the past society. Big emotional pressure of the whole situation is additionally increased by the fact that the sacrifice of the young man rather took place before the temple collapsed on all participants of the drama. How do you know this? Researchers who studied the skeleton noticed the difference in the color of the bones in the upper and lower parts. They estimated it was due to less blood in the upper half of the skeleton. At this point, please remember the bull's sacrifice from the sarcophagus from Hagia Triada. This image shows a priestess collecting the animal's blood into a vessel. Most researchers suggest that it happened in a similar way here in this room. There was one more man here. It seems he was running away. Next to him were the broken remains of the vase. Scientists believe that the vase was filled with blood. The offering was done. When the man was more or less where I stand, everything collapsed due to the earthquake. The rest was completed by the fires from the lamps that were here. Everything that was flammable burned down, and the temple that had stood here suddenly turned into a stone tomb. There is one more thing. Such construction of the temple is unusual for the Minoans. Minoan temples are more labyrinthine, but there was a researcher who believes that this wasn't the exit from the temple, but that the part similar to the one at the other side was here, now completely ruined. Traces of something are here, only they are too small to say that they are such rooms. And there is one more thing as a curiosity, because the temple has an unusual appearance for the Minoans. The sacrificial table is also unusual for Minoans. The Minoans were wooden, and here it was stone. Additionally, in this room from which I started, 2 bronze pyxes of the Mycenaean type were found. One was found in the so-called King's Tholos at Furni Cemetery, and the other was found simply in a grave in Mycenae. So maybe this can be a small trace. The place of the drama. Just like it stayed until 1979 when it was unearthed. It is also enigmatic because all other places after huge earthquakes, also after this earthquake, were rebuilt, reconstructed, even with greater brilliance than before. It was left as it was. That's why we don't find other so interesting situations elsewhere, because they have been tidied up and rebuilt. Here, nothing. But why? This place could be connected with the community which disappeared after the earthquake. So there was no people or no more culture that would be interested in this place. Or there was a kind of taboo, because it was a human sacrifice after all. Summarizing, in the face of cataclysm that cannot be dealt with, the community prepares a sacrifice of what is most valuable. That is human sacrifice. It used to be like that with all societies. In an exceptional situation, exceptional actions were taken to appease the deity. The offering was done, but the earthquake happened anyway. After this cataclysm and others at that time, society tidied and rebuilt the country. However, they didn't touch this place. All those who made such sacrifice died. And people impressed with the metaphysical implications of what happened here didn't touch this place. Maybe. And of course, it could have been otherwise, but I had to share this thought with you. And above it all rose and rises the sacred mountain of Juktas, now with a typical Minoan sanctuary at the top. I'd like to add that Anemospilia wasn't left out in the rebuilding, as it was generally unknown. None of these things. There was a Minoan road from here before it was demolished. The road leading to Mount Juktas Peak Sanctuary. Not a narrow path, but a clear, well-kept road that was visible during excavations, here on this map. Finally, in order not to be groundless, that the entire ancient world did human sacrifices in spatial times, I have a few examples. In the book The Golden Bough, Fraser describes the human sacrifice did by the ancient Greeks during the plague epidemic. He also points to Plutarch, who described the sacrifice of a woman in Boeotia. Also Livy in his history described a human sacrifice made by the Romans after the defeat at Cannae. These are just a few examples. There are many more, but I won't go into details about them. Now let's say we are going along the old Minoan road to the top of Mount Juktas. Mount Juktas is the place you can see when you look along the line of temples in Knossos. And then through the halls of consecration. It's a big tree. But imagine that you are in Bronze Age, and that time there wasn't this tree, but instead of it, there was the top of Mount Juktas with a sanctuary on it. Local tradition, ancient literature, Byzantine tradition, and testimonies of former travelers locate the tomb of Zeus on this mountain. But look, Cretan Zeus, it isn't the same as Greek, ancient Zeus, because Greek Zeus didn't die. What is more, he didn't die a martyr's death and came back to life every year, like Cretan Zeus did. What was the relationship of Cretan Zeus with the Cretan great goddess? Some researchers and also some traditional stories say about the sun. In the sanctuary itself, we don't find information who was worshipped there. Anyway, I invite you to explore this place with me, because peak sanctuaries are typical for Minoan culture of Bronze Age. Mount Yuktas has two peaks. There is a modern Orthodox church on the lower level, but this time I will not visit it. My way leads to higher peak, Silikorfi, with a prehistoric sanctuary. Researchers recognized it is an open-air sanctuary, but it had its own architecture. I enter the sanctuary and go up the ramp. The ramp leads to the altar, next to which there is an important, or perhaps the most important part of the sanctuary, a deep chasm. Altar. The ruins of the altar are under me. Beneath the altar are two terraces, one higher, second lower. I'm going to the higher terrace. Higher terrace under my feet. Altar. There is lower terrace. And below the terraces are 5 rooms, anyway visible in the satellite photos. The first excavations in this place were conducted by Arthur Evans. Contemporary research was conducted by Alexandra Karetsu in the 70th of the 20th century. And here is mentioned chasm, very important in this sanctuary. Chasm. I'm sitting at the edge of the mentioned fissure. It was excavated to the depth of 10 meters, and the bottom hasn't been dug. It seems to be the main sacred place of this sanctuary. Above it is an altar. Votive offerings taken from this fissure date back even to the beginning of the Minoan period, about 2,500, some even say 3,000 years BC, on the border of the Neolithic. The chasm had an even deeper feeling, and it is very likely that the offerings are deeper as well, which will indicate that it is a very archaic sacred place. This place is special. Why? Because Minoan people worshipped the great goddess on tops of mountains and also in caves. And here is the peak of the mountain and also the chasm into the depth of the earth, which is something like a cave. That is both things in one place. The mountain is a traditional sacred place in all cultures. It has its roots in the depth of the earth and its peak reaches to heaven. Metaphysically, it connects 3 cosmological zones: the underworld, our earthly world, and the heavens above us. Caves, and that would also be applied to very deep fissures, are what you might call Mother Earth womb. Even symbolically, they are dark, humid places, and people are born in such dark and humid places. Sacredness immediately comes to mind. Oral tradition dating back to the distant past also leads to such interpretation of caves as sacred places connected with the womb of the goddess, Mother Earth. Symbolically, Mother Earth, because it is rather about the same goddess, the mysteries of the world and the universe. You could say that there is one of the places where the sacred manifests itself. Contemporarily speaking, it is an energetic place. Now, let's see the rooms that are situated in a north-south direction. There is a small one. Here is another one. And here, this chamber is quite clearly visible in the satellite photos. This is the fourth room coming from the north. Interesting. There is a chasm in this room too. So in this place is a greater number of fissures. I go near the fifth room. There is also a fissure in it. It seems that these were sacred rooms, not shelters for priests and worshippers. This is the fissure in the fourth room. Of course, now filled with earth and rubble. I am now going to the fifth room to show the location of the next fissure. It's smaller, but it's still a fissure, also filled with earth and stones. Look, what a nice view of the ramp. Here is the entrance from which the ramp leads to the altar. And here was probably the lower terrace. It came to my mind, such first impression in situ about these 5 rooms. The first 3 rooms from the north have no fissures. The last 2 have fissures, sacrificial fissures, telling you straight away what's going on. So maybe these 3 rooms without fissures formed a 3-partite shrine characteristic for the Minoans. Such shrine is depicted on the written of Zakros and shows the peak sanctuary, with clouds, goats, a bird and crowned with horns of consecration. The same shape of the 3-partite shrine is known, for example, from Knossos, from a fresco from Knossos, and a similar one was found at Knossos. Perhaps this temple shape is also found in Phaistos. Well, maybe it is like this. The middle room and 2 side rooms. The middle one is bigger. They form a shrine. And next to them, there are 2 rooms with fissures. Over there. So maybe there was this shrine and 2 rooms over there. I don't know how to call them because we don't know their religion. Sacrificial rooms? Votive offerings were found in such fissures. So maybe it is better to say simply places where the votive offerings were left. However, those small fissures seem to be rather additional. The main chasm is this one. After all, it is crowned with an altar. As I mentioned, the researchers look into it to a depth of 10 meters. What is below and how deep, only people from the past millennia know. Gifts and offerings were found not only in the chasms. Time has scattered them over the altar and on the terraces. They were also in the rooms I was just talking about. Near the main chasm and near the altar, at the same time, a deposit from almost 4,000 years ago was found, which confirms the spatial status of this chasm. This is what the deposit looked like at the time of its discovery. Findings were discovered in a thick layer of ash, and the deposit contained 36 votive labrices, pottery, mainly made up from libation vessels, animal bones, mainly from small ovichaprids, a large number of clay pebbles, triangular clay discs, animal figurines, embryo-shaped figurines and also V-shaped clay models, reminiscent of schematic bucrania, and some objects of uncertain definition, and also charcoal. The artifacts you are looking at come from the entire sanctuary, not only from this deposit. And this is a very interesting artifact that was found in this room. It is a seal in the shape of a bull's head, with a star between the horns. I keep looking around here, slowly walking toward the exit. There is a telephone mast from the year 1952 in the area of the sanctuary, and this building connected with it. Excavation under them have never been done. Who knows? Maybe there is something even more interesting than where I am. This thinking was interrupted by my husband's voice, who found something interesting outside the strict area of the sanctuary. Ancient or contemporary, the remains of old votive offerings and sacrificial vessels can probably be found here from time to time. And of course, you should leave them where they belong. But considering what we have seen in other places, they can also be modern offerings. For what god? Is it for the great goddess? Or for her young companion? Maybe one day we will find out. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe because it's motivating for me. And see you in the next film. Bye bye!